Hello, A-Push Nation! My name is Amelia, and in this video I will be explaining and illustrating the causes of the Great Depression of 1929. So you've probably heard about the stock market crash and how that single thing started the depression, but actually there are a lot more causes that aren't as obvious. Now there are 7 main causes of the depression, but a lot of things happened beforehand, such as World War I, that played a huge role in the creation of economic turmoil for the US and other nations as a result. So let's just dive into it. I'm going to take it back to World War I for a minute just to give you some background on the state of the world prior to the Depression, because it's really important for the formation of the causes and why all this came to be. So we have the Central Powers, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, as well as a few others, but these were the main 3 involved in that. And also the Allied Powers, which was Britain, France, and Russia, and the United States eventually when we got involved in the war effort there. But Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by a Serbian man, part of the Black Hand, in 1914, and this was one of the main causes that really set off the war. And to make a long story short here, Germany and the Central Powers lost World War I, and after a giant meeting of all the world powers put together, they came up with the Treaty of Versailles, and essentially this blamed Germany for World War I, and for all the damage they would have to pay money. And this reparation amount was set at $33 billion. Now, no country had or ever will have that amount of money just laying around. So they had to hyperinflate their currency to make up for it. And unfortunately, this led to their own depression. And they went to American banks to take out loans and things of that sort. And this is where America started to feel the effects of the Depression, not just from our own country, but from other countries as well. And we had just gotten out of the war, and then now our enemy is taking money from us like a starving beggar. So it's coming full circle for us, and that's where we feel the economic effects. So during the war, we were producing mass amounts of goods for both our troops and alliance troops over in Europe. Everyone was heading to the factories to produce for the war effort, but unfortunately, this led to overproduction, and no one had the money to buy the goods because of the debt that we were starting to get ourselves into. No one was buying goods from overseas, and no one was buying our goods from overseas, so we didn't have foreign market share, and this drove down the price of our goods. There was mass amounts of food production for the war with the implication of like tractors and such, but now it wasn't needed, so farmers weren't selling and the government wasn't funding them basically at all. So we felt the effects in those ways as well. The wealth gap of the US was widening, and only a small percentage of the population could keep their head above water in terms of economics, and the rest were just in never-ending debt. And because of this, they couldn't spend money that was needed to build up the economy. People were using credit to buy things, like the buy now, pay later mentality of the Roaring '20s, but banks didn't realize that they were giving out money to people who would never be able to pay it back, and that's why we have credit score today, but this became an issue for the banks because they were just putting themselves into a debt, which I will get to later on. So the government stepped in and issued trade tariffs to try to suppress the issues of the goods not being sold, and this only made things worse because it made other countries not want to buy from us in the instances where they even wanted to, and it was just a game of raising tariffs all over the place because we raised our tariffs, so then the other nations did as well to compete for market share. People began to withdraw their money from the banks to compensate for the lack of hard cash that was around, and because of this, the banks started closing left and right, and people rushed to withdraw their money. And they were panicking because all the banks were closing like before they could get their money back from them, so a lot of people lost a lot of money, and this led to a crash and ultimately a stock market crash. And this stock market crash really destroyed Wall Street, and it destroyed the confidence of investors as well, because the bull market of upward stock had turned into a bear market of downward stock. If you've ever taken an economics class, you've probably heard about the business cycle, what goes up must come down, and how the economy fluctuates from contractionary and expansionary periods. But when it comes to an extreme, that's where you get a depression. The GDP of the US was essentially cut in half at the peak of the Depression. We were stuck in a rut that seemed impossible to get out of. And that spiked unemployment, which made things worse because people didn't have stable jobs and they couldn't get credit because of the banks closing. So, overall, the Depression made the US more conscious of economic issues. But also, we're $22 trillion in debt today, so I don't know if we learned from our mistakes.